Good morning. Today is the second day of the second Adar, and I guess it's the 22nd? Is that possible?
No, it's no, it's
22nd of March?
13th or 12th.
12th of March. Okay, so we're now going to start chapter 2 of this book called Mystical Concepts in Chasidism from Rabbi Shochet. Let's see what he has to say about tzimtzum. Tzimtzum literally means, as we know, some kind of contraction, but it's not really true, because contraction is the contraction is the meaning of tzimtzum. That's like when I say mitz, when I say the mitz of something, like the concentrate of something,
The juice.
right? The juice,
Yeah.
the essence. But tzimtzum by the Arizal means something entirely different. It means it actually means a void.
A void.
A pushing away of, meaning something is missing. It's not that it came to the concentrate. And these are two very different concepts.
Yeah.
Everybody uses contraction. The reason we do use contraction in the end is because there's this whole question about, I don't know how there could be a question, but there is a question. I'll explain maybe how it came about, but whether what the Arizal described as a tzimtzum, as some kind of void being created, whether that is literal or a metaphor. So to ask something like that about anything the Arizal said, anything that Rabbi Isaac Lurie said, is almost like not understanding the first word he said. Because everything he said, from beginning to end, is a metaphor. I mentioned that there's, at the end of Eitz Chaim that we have, there's a couple of chapters at the end where he connects his whole system to the real world. But other than that, everything he says is a metaphor. So how could you understand contraction as anything else? So this led to a huge problem as time went on, and even a split in the interpretation of Kabbalah. Like, what was he saying? So again, to me, it's 100%. There's no other option that he was giving a metaphor like everything else. But then there is a real question about what went through contraction. Was it what we call the light, meaning the revelation of God, or was it God himself? Right? Even if you talk metaphorically, what are you talking about? Is it the source of the light, meaning God himself, or the light, the object or the adjective?
Sorry, yeah.
Right? Which one? The object or the adjective? The source or the light? And there became a very pronounced discussion about which one he meant. And that's a legitimate question, because within the realm of metaphor, that is a real question. What did he mean? But it seems when you read it, it's very, very clear. He says, Or Ein Sof, the light of the infinite, the revelation of the infinite went through this tzimtzum. Now, that's on the one, so to call it a contraction is like to say, well, it didn't really disappear, it just moved aside. So I understand contraction like something is being pushed aside. And then you're right, that wherever it's being pushed to, it seems to like maybe concentrate more. But the point of the tzimtzum is where it's not where it's concentrated. And anyway, the whole concept of concentration in the infinite doesn't really mean anything. So contraction is not such a bad word after all. But if you want to say that the light completely was removed, contraction is not a great word, in my opinion. I think that you need to say something like a void. The void was created. And that's exactly what he says. He says that after the tzimtzum, there's now a void, because whatever was mitzamtzim, whatever was being contracted, is now not there. Yes. So let's see, what is this for? What is this whole thing? So the Arizal, today the academics say that he didn't invent this concept, and it would be strange if he did. Why? Because it's such the question was everywhere, the question that you wanted to solve, and we'll see what the question was. And the solution was offered everywhere, that this is the solution in some way or another. The only problem was you couldn't fit it into regular rabbinic sources. Like, where do you find something like that in rabbinic sources, that there is a contraction, that there is a tzimtzum? Where do you get this from? So let's see. One of the basic theological problems is concerned, so I wouldn't say this is the basic, one of the basic theological problems, this is the basic theological problem, is concerned with the seeming enigma, meaning the paradox, of reconciling God with the universe. Why? Because how can there be a transition from the infinite to the finite? So if something is infinite, how did it become finite? Someone would say you take a piece. But if you take a piece of infinity, it's still infinity. How do you break it in such a way that it suddenly becomes something finite? From pure intelligence to matter. Okay, now he was careful not to use spirituality. So it's not from pure spiritual to matter. It's from pure intelligence to matter. From absolute unity or oneness to multifariousness, which means to multiplicity, to many facets. Moreover, how do we reconcile the divine creation and bringing about of the universe and its multifarious parts with the internal and inviolable absolute perfection of God, of whom Scripture affirms, I, the eternal, I have not changed? That's in Malachi. In essence, the concepts and doctrines discussed here and in the chapters following all relate to these issues. So we see that what problem was it coming to answer? How do you make the leap from God, who is supposed to be infinite, perfect, unchanging, to the world we're experiencing, our experience, our life as human beings, which is fleeting, changing, imperfect, and so on and so forth. So creation is often explained in terms of a theory of emanationism, as we talked about that in one of the sessions we did last week, I think, by means of a chain of successive emanations. I mean, emanation is like an outflow, from higher to lower, meaning they flow down. That's what we said, that's why water is such a good analogy, because it flows downhill. The finite evolved from the infinite, and matter evolved from spirit. So he said, matter does not evolve from spirit, ever, but that's the conception that most people have. And the Arizal says something similar to that. He says, from the thickening of the light, the vessels were formed. That is true in light and vessels. That is not true from spirit to matter. No amount of thickening spirit will ever lead to matter. That's why we have a dualistic picture of reality.
Wait, he's rewind a second. He said that
the Arizal has a statement, from the thickening of the light are formed the vessels.
Okay.
But that is talking about in the supernal realm. Because
Okay.
light in vessels is not physical light in vessels.
It's not our,
It's the light in vessels. There's since they're both supernal, they're not matter or spirit. There's something, there may be ideas, whatever you want. So the thickening causes some kind of vessel to be formed, because the vessel is nothing different than the light.
Yeah.
They're basically the same thing. But when it comes to our realm, the mundane realm, so here no amount of spirit will ever make matter. It simply doesn't happen. If you would say that spirit is energy, and then you would go to Einstein and say, but E equals mc squared, meaning that there's a ton of energy inside matter. Okay, but I don't know of any process that can take energy and turn it into matter. There might be a ton of energy trapped in there. That's fine. That's not an issue. But it's not the same thing as saying that if you condense energy, you'll get matter. So this is a really problematic statement, and it means that either we're thinking differently, or again, he has some kind of reason why he does this. But this suggestion, as it stands, is insufficient. Okay, so now actually he breaks it down, he tears it down, he says, you can't say this. Matter did not evolve from spirit. That's what people think. It's often explained in those terms. To speak of a casual, I think this is a mistake. It should be a causal, evolutionary process of successive emanations merely begs the question and does not answer it. Meaning begs the question just makes it stronger. For regardless of how long the chain of it should have been causal. How long the chain of causal evolutions may be, there always remains some relationship, qualitative as well as quantitative, between the effect and its cause. Just as in a material chain the links are interlocked, connected and interrelated, retaining a basic relationship between the first link and the last one, so too would it be in a gradual process of causal evolution. Thus, since the beginning of the chain of emanations is God, the infinite, the aspect of infinity is never really cast off. To mention one of the problems, infinity, perfect, and so on. All these things would have to be in everything that he created. So if you have a link, if you have a causal chain of evolution, and that's what emanation is, it's not something from nothing. Right? We talked about this difference between creationism and emanationism. So if you're talking about emanationism, you're lost forever in everything that is emanated having to be exactly like God. It has to have the same qualities. So it has to be infinite, it has to be perfect. You never lose that, you never get away from that. So, okay, this was the general problem. Like I said, emanationism doesn't solve the problem because no amount of thickening of vessels of spirit will ever lead to matter. So had the world descended from the light of the infinite according to a gradual descent from grade to grade, gradation, by means of cause and effect, and this is usually called continuity, first of all, and the other word, which I'm now missing somehow, is not continuity. This is the book I mentioned called by Alfred Lovejoy, called The Great Chain of Being. And it's a very important book because it traces the history of this idea of emanationism, really, and traces it back to Plato. As opposed to Aristotle, who actually may have had a different conception. We don't know for sure because he never says so. But creation ex nihilo, meaning something from nothing, is a different option. But Plato didn't accept that option. He wanted the option of a continuous descent from above to below. In any case, because of that, there's a lot of people that say that Kabbalah was a Neoplatonistic type of thought, meaning that when Plato was rediscovered in the 11th, 12th centuries, because it was missing from the Christian lands for a long time because it wasn't in Latin, it was only retained in Arabic, and then it took time for it to come back. And when it was discovered again, and the Neoplatonic writings of Plotinus and so on were suddenly read, so this affected the Jewish thought also. It may have affected it, but this idea of emanationism is not at the core of Kabbalah. It's not the only core, in other words. There are other things there. For instance, creationism. Kabbalah couldn't go against the grain of Torah, and the Torah seems to be saying creationism, seems to be saying something from nothing, instantaneous.
Yes.
And that's different than an evolution, and it's very hard to even understand in the Torah an evolutionary process. You can find it, it's not that it's missing entirely, the idea is there, but you have to dig to get to it. In any case, so you've got this problem, just as that everything that comes out of this emanation has to be of the same nature, the same qualities as where the process started. Had the world descended from the light of the infinite according to a gradual descent, we said, grade by grade, by means of cause and effect, this world would not, in such a case, have ever been created in its present form, in a finite, limited, imperfect, and so on. Nor, for that matter, even the spiritual, Olam Haba, the world to come, the supernal Garden of Eden, or the souls themselves. Why? Because they're not infinite? No, because there are levels there. And so there's limits. So why would there be limits suddenly? Where did the limits come from? In a gradual evolution and causal process, the effect is encompassed by the cause. And in Hebrew we have two words for that. We have different words for when we want to say cause and effect, and when we want to say that the effect is encompassed in the cause. It's very interesting. We have words to describe that exactly. Like this whole sentence you have to say in English, the effect is encompassed by the cause, meaning the effect is nothing more then what was in the cause? It can't have anything else. So that is called in Hebrew ilah ve'alul.
Wow.
And it comes, the word that comes from that is an olel. An olel is a suckling. It's somebody who's still, the child who's still on his mother's breast all the time. Why? Because there's nothing in him that's not in his mother. Everything that he has is from his mother. He hasn't developed anything of his own at that time. So it's a very interesting word.
Yeah.
And King David uses this in Psalms. He says, "Ke gamur aleimo, keolel." No, I got the wrong verse. Strike that. In a gradual, so this doesn't happen. Thus, even numerous contractions will not avail. Notice I use the word contraction, because contraction, all it's going to do is push things to be more concentrated, or to push aside, but nothing's going to change. Thus, even numerous contractions will not avail to their being matter as dense as earth, by way of an evolution from the spirituality of the abstract intelligences, nor even that most subtle and diaphanous type of matter, nothing like that, of the angels will come about from something spiritual. Again, the creation of the world is not by way of a development from cause to effect, for even myriads upon myriads of oculations and evolutions from grade to grade in a causal process will not avail the development and coming into being of physical matter, not even the matter of the firmaments out of an evolution from spirit. Rather, you have to come to a new idea here. It is the power of the blessed Ein Sof, the infinite, to do what? The omnipotent to create ex nihilo, something from nothing. And this is not by way of a developmental order, but by way of a leap. So contraction is in order to allow a leap to happen. So I have to take away what there was so that there can be a leap over the nothingness. And this is supposed to solve the problem, because now you're saying it's a paradox. I can't explain it to you. In other words, it's not a logical causal effect process, which logically would lead to nothing different than what you started with. It has to be some kind of quantum leap where there's something until here, and then it jumps and it becomes something else, and what happens in the middle is a mystery. I don't know. But what I know is, whatever my categories of thought are on the other side, they don't fit with what it started with. So I have this not process, but rather a contraction, which really means a leap.
Yeah.
And the contraction is just the mechanism, as it were, to create the possibility of the leap.
Yes.
Sort of the way of thinking about this is that when you jump over a hole in the ground, so the hole is like some kind of barrier.
Yes.
And what it's meant to do is it's meant to say that if you somehow made it to the other side, you're something else. Something happened to you. There's no way you can do that. So today, the way that people think about this is like a black hole. It would say like a black hole is a type of contraction. Why? Because nothing can move from one side to the other without losing its form entirely. But the question is whether that's still even what we're talking about. Why? Because there's matter on one side, there's matter on the other. It just changed its form altogether, but it's still the same matter. So really, it's not a physical thing. We have to accept that there's some kind of leap that's going on, and it's first of all intellectual. What was on one side is not what comes out on the other side.
Yeah.
That is the essence of the contraction. Hence, that something non-divine and finite should come about on the other side necessitates there being in the process of emanation a radical step, a leap, a jump. In Hebrew it's a diluk, fitza, which breaks the gradualism and establishes a radical distinction between cause and effect, a radical act of creation. And that's what it's called. It's called creationism. Only after that has occurred can we speak of an evolutionary process culminating in finite and material entities. So once there's a contraction, now you can start talking about a gradual process that leads from whatever was created slowly becoming the reality that you're aware of. And this principle is at the root of the doctrines of tzimtzum, contraction as it's translated, and the sfirot, introduced by Kabbalah and elaborated upon in Chasidism to solve the problem of creation. So it's very interesting, because when you read the Bible, there's no problem. There's no emanationism. It's very hard to see emanationism in the Bible. It's very easy to see creationism. The Bible seems to be saying stuff is just coming out, coming out, coming out. So each one of these is a leap. Each day of creation is like a leap. You can't explain where it came from.
Yes.
It didn't come from the previous day. It just came out of nowhere.
Yes.
So it's very interesting that it's sort of like going full circle. That what Kabbalah seemed to introduce before the Arizal was this gradual process. And that fits a little bit with Platonism. But again, you can find this in the sages, and maybe we'll talk about it, where the sages were well aware of this concept of emanation. There wasn't something new to them. So I don't think that the Kabbalists had to go look very far. They had it at home. But they came full circle to suddenly introducing creation as it's in the Bible. The literal meaning, that something comes out of nothing. And that was the contribution. This was like a contribution of the result, putting this together, saying that in the middle of the process of emanation, there's suddenly a contraction. Chasidus goes further. Chasidus later talks about at least 3 different contractions. And in some texts, there's actually even more than that. And we'll see, we'll talk about it. I don't know where he's going to take it, but the main type of contraction that has to happen for us is in the mind, is to come and say that what God is inaccessible to my mind. There's a gap. There's a gap between the two. I can never grasp it. That is said by Isaiah. Your thoughts are not my thoughts. I can't think that way, which makes all my questions about how the world is run moot. They don't even start. But as we said, we do bridge the gap. The reason we bridge the gap is not because we can think like God, but because God set us up in such a way that not through the mind, but through the heart, there is a connection between one side of the gap and the other. Through the heart, you do see something of what was before. And we'll talk about that. That's next time, God willing.
It's funny, my brother calls me and he says, how do we know that the days of the week, maybe God created the week on Wednesday. It's coming from like...
Yeah, but it's fine. You can start on Wednesday. It doesn't matter.
Right.
As long as there's a leap.
To him, I said, the first day is Yom Echad.
Right.
We don't know.
Doesn't matter what...
After that, there was a shady. And there was,
Right. Exactly.